I just finished reading Lisa Schwartz's Stained Glass Ceilings, How Evangelicals Do Gender and Practice Power. And I just wanted to say a few words about it. I thought it was a really helpful look. She says that her central contention is that evangelicalism, in both its complementarian and egalitarian expressions, buttress constructions of meaning and power that center men. And I think that as someone who has inhabited egalitarian spaces for quite a while now, we sometimes can lack the words and get confused about how it is that we absolutely do have egalitarian beliefs, and yet many of us as women struggle nevertheless in those spaces. And it can be difficult to find the language to explain how it is that we're still struggling when, for example, clearly in the Free Methodist Church, we just elected our first female bishop. So those narratives seem to suggest that everything is fine. Years ago, I actually had a superintendent who, when I tried to bring up issues of women in ministry, told me point blank, we have no problems with women in ministry in Southern Michigan. So first of all, in this book, she looks at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and she details the stories and the practices that inscribe and maintain gender narratives in both places. So there is overt male domination there. It's rooted both in their retelling of the Genesis story and in the history of the seminary. But at the same time, there's an alternative story for women who have and maintain deep connections through separate networks and groups, which are sustaining, although they're subordinate. So at the end of the book, Swartz points out that it would actually be easier for the women at Southern Baptist to rise up and make a change because they already have these deep networks and connections. There is already such a thing as women's spaces, although men can walk into them and take over anytime. Now at Asbury, the stories are stories of unity and gender blindness, and also individualism. And those public narratives open doors for some women. Some women do get appointed. They do get into the room where it happens. But at the same time, private stories of women's roles and places, particularly put in place to maintain heteronormative marriages, those maintain some unequal structures that bleed over into public behavior, but they can't be addressed without seeming to challenge the narrative of unity. She did a really excellent job of talking about the construction of femininity that doesn't fall too far on the feminist line, because we don't like feminists, but also doesn't fall too much on the girly girl line, because that falls into the temptress narrative or into somebody who's not serious enough to be in classes, to be a fellow student. And so navigating that middle ground where women affirm their maternal instincts and yet are in spaces with men and promote unity, all of that makes invisible the structural inequities that women still struggle with. I'm going to end by reading this chapter. This book is about men's command over institutional, cultural, and religious power. Following Kristen Dumais' historical treatment of evangelical hegemonic masculinity, whiteness, and Christian nationalism, and Beth Allison Barr's exploration of how the subjugation of women became the gospel truth, these chapters offer a glimpse into the everyday cultural processes that sustain patriarchal power. In both cases, the maintenance of power relies heavily on cultural centering. Both Asbury and Southern tell stories that center white married men and de-center other standpoints, interpretive frameworks, and material interests. At Southern, this centering is overt, justified in terms of male headship and neo-reformed notions of hierarchical order. Asbury's more subtle gender blindness also reinforces masculine authority, even in its commitment to egalitarianism. As Sandra Harding explains, the assumption or advocacy of gender neutrality marks positions that cannot avoid advantaging men, since the distinctively human, or modern, or Chinese, or moral, or historical, or philosophical, etc., systematically has been constituted in terms of the manly, and vice versa. Egalitarian institutions cannot easily throw off the shackles of patriarchy using gender blindness. This strategy allows gendered power dynamics to masquerade as neutrality, making them even more difficult to recognize, let alone desituate. It was a good book. I recommend it.